And with them are numbered also the Valarindi, the offspring of the Valar, their children begotten in Arda, yet of the race of the Ainur who were before the world. They are many and fair. Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Arda. Today we are going to have some fun and look at one of Tolkien's abandoned concepts, the children of the Valar, including the son of Morgoth himself. Thanks and shout out especially to Tolkien Gateway for helping me find the primary sources in the History of Middle-earth books. There are 12 volumes, so it's pretty dense reading. And for helping me gather information on this rather obscure topic. Sources are in the description below. Check them all out. Most of the information today comes from the notes gathered by Christopher Tolkien in the History of Middle-earth, including Morgoth's Ring, the Peoples of Middle-earth, the Shaping of Middle-earth, the Lost Road, and the Lost Tales, among many others. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. Let's start with a bit of an overall conceptual view. In their early stages, the Valar seemed to take on more of a mythological pantheon sort of role in Tolkien's earlier writings. Manwë and Varda, the king and queen of the Valar, had two children, a son, Fionwë, and a daughter, Erenthi. Aule of the earth and Yavanna of the plants also had two, Arome and Nessa, who would eventually obviously become Valar in the canon we know today. Arome and Vanna had a daughter named Nyaliqui. Tolkas and Nessa also had a son, Telemektar. Finally, Melko, the early name for Melkor, and an ogress, probably akin to a giant of sorts, had Kalimbo, or Kasumot, eventually named Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs, in the canon we know today. Finally, it is worth mentioning, as it is in that Tolkien Gateway article, that Turin, whose place in the metaphysical part of the Legendarium has always been rather interesting, what with killing Morgoth and the Dagor Daggerath, and having a seat among the greatest heroes of Middle-earth, was named among the sons of the gods, just like Melian, who was also a child of Lorien. But again, this list, which was nicely compiled by Tolkien Gateway, shows a lot of changes throughout Tolkien's Legendarium. But let's get back to that conceptual overview. Having the Valar be more physical types of gods who can take spouses, have children, be slain, and more, certainly make them more akin to the Norse gods and Greek gods, among other pantheons. Even Melkor, or Melko, as he is known in the older texts, having a child with an ogress is very similar to the gods of Norse mythology, who would at times mate with the giants of Jotunheim, who must have had a similar sort of strength in them to do something like this, right? An ogress with a Vala or a giant with a Norse god. It's very interesting. Now, the Valarindi, literally meaning children of the Valar in Quenya, mirror the idea of demigods, but almost entirely function on the power level of Maiar. However, I agree with the idea that Tolkien walked away from this concept because it imagines the Valar as something more physical, less metaphysical, more like a godly pantheon than the servants of the true god Eru Iluvatar, who were supposed to steward the world rather than rule it. For instance, in the canon as it is, the Valar chose their forms and genders and bearings as they appeared as what fitted them and their conceptual powers. They took on mates who had complementary roles to their own, perhaps something more spiritual, but not to create offspring. They also have conceptual siblings, some of them, in the eyes of Iluvatar. But again, I think this was more metaphysical rather than something physical or practical. Like, it makes sense for the brother who represented wind and skies and light in some senses to be the brother and counterpart to the one who represents darkness and clouds and the evil pits of the earth, and so forth, Manwë and Morgoth. But it would be strange to have the Ainur become the children of other Ainur, unless they explicitly decided to be the incarnated bodies of others that they knew before the world began, during the Ainulindale. Yeah, I can see why Tolkien changed his mind on this. The Valar, they were spirits rather than something more physical with bodies and biology. Even the Maiar are similar in this way, all except for one. Melian the Maia of Beleriand had a child with Thingol, who was indeed one of the first fathers of the great elven houses. He was something beyond many other elves, but he was still lesser in spirit and power than she. Now, I do think this works, however, but I wonder if Tolkien would have put more work into it if he had had more time to revise the Silmarillion, because Melian, as she exists in the story, is on the mortal lands of Middle-earth with the elves and with the men. And while she is only a Maya and not a daughter of a Vala in the canon, her role being the mother of Luthien adds a sort of mysticism to Luthien and their whole family line that makes it unlike any other family tree in Middle-earth. It elevates the eventual kings of Numenor, as well as Elrond's family and Aragorn and his lineage, to be slightly different and more metaphysically powerful in certain ways than other elves and men. Because Melian having children is not an abused or overused concept, I do think it works. Now, getting back to our Children of the Valar specifically, let's go through their lore, how they acted originally in the Silmarillion, how they changed into what we know today as canon, or how they were scrapped as characters altogether. Starting with Fionwe, who became the chief of the Maiar Eonwe in the canon. Fionwe was a bit of this Shakespearean character, from what I can tell, one who would have more importance in the story directly, as he would be the one to overthrow Morgoth at the end of the First Age, or even kill him in the Daggerath. Now, as we kind of know it, it's this mixture of Eärendil, Turin, and Tolkas that help take Morgoth down in the Daggerath, but again, Tolkien was even going back to revise that. In some of the earliest versions, Fionwe was even the son of Tolkas, which kind of makes sense, as Tolkas was the champion of the Valar, and Eonwe was the master at arms for the Valar. We'll get back to Tolkas' other son later, though. Ultimately, Fionwe became the male chieftain of the Valar, while his sister Erenti became Elmare, and there's little to say about her or how she was different. Through a larger lens, I think the idea was that the son and daughter of Manwë and Varda would be the foremost among the Valarindi, or demigods, but they ultimately just joined with the concept of the Maiar, becoming the chief leaders of the Maiar instead. Moving on to Aule and Yavanna, they were going to be a bit higher up on the leadership of the Pantheon, I think, because they were going to have children and grandchildren as well. From what I can tell, their children Orome and Nessa were simply changed to being others among the Valar, but most of their lore actually stayed the same, and they are still viewed as siblings more or less in the canon. Now, Orome and Vanna's daughter, Nielihui, meaning something like Little Tears, was meant to be a maiden whose tears created snowdrops, and where she danced, her feet left daffodils behind. Now, this character was not really changed, but more or less erased entirely from the story. I think her role was very similar to her mother Vanna, her aunt Nessa for dancing, and then Nienna, whose pity and sorrow left tears of great power. Similarly, there was her cousin, the son of Tolkas and Nessa, named Telemektar, who was a warrior like his father, but actually used a sword. His name meant roof sword roughly, because it was said that he would always draw his sword to defend the stars from Melko, and indeed it seems that he became something more conceptual like the Orion constellation, called Menelmacar, the swordsman of the stars, portending the final battle against Melko. In these early conceptions, this character would protect the stars after aiding the elves of Tol Eressëa. He would cut down a great pine and strand Melko outside of the world, and Telemektar would then replace the stars when Melko destroyed them with the aid of Varda, who gave him these stars. Also, I wonder if Eärendil, whose passage through the stars guiding the heavens, also filled the role in many ways. So this character became the Menelmacar in the sky, and then also his role was filled by Eärendil. I think this was one of those early myth stories that was also just too mythological and perhaps not where Tolkien wanted to take the tale of Morgoth and the Valar, but he kept remnants and legacies of this character, which I find to be pretty cool. I think of the lost children of the Valar, Telemektar is probably my favorite, and what became of him depicts just how great of a world builder Tolkien was. Finally, we have the Dark Lord Melko himself, who had a son with Fluithwin, or Obandi, an ogress. This son was Kalimbo, or Kosamot, who became the Balrog named Gothmog, the leader of the others and the lieutenant of Angband. Conceptually, this does make sense, as Gothmog acted as Morgoth's fist throughout much of the First Age and before, and while I can't find many differences about how he would have acted or what he would have done differently in Tolkien's earliest writings, this character likely would have mirrored Fionwe, as Fionwe was the heir of the Elder King, Manwë. Kosamot, along with Sauron's Telvildo, the Prince of Cats, would have been the heirs apparent of Morgoth, but he was instead changed to the Gothmog we know, and likely it made the role smaller and easier to conceive than it would have been as Morgoth's heir. While most of these characters changed to Maiar or were lost concepts altogether, I think it was smart of Tolkien to change this. Compared to most mythology, I like the idea that the Valar were actually meant to be stewards who shaped Arda physically and helped it achieve the vision shown to them in the Ainulindale. They were servants of the god, with Morgoth not only being evil for fighting the children of God in Middle-earth, but also being a deviant for breaking out of his role as a Vala and getting more directly involved with the events of the world than he should have. If Tolkien had given the Valar children with more of an apparent role in the story, it would have, in my opinion, diminished the deeds of elves, dwarves, and men in the Elder Days, and it would have created more plot holes of why didn't the Valarindi, or demigods, also do more to aid the Free Peoples, since they were introduced as powerful characters with agency in the world. In that quote from the beginning of this video, it says that they were numerous, so I've been able to talk about all of the Valarindi that I found here, but I wonder if the original idea was to have many more of these characters, but no, I think Tolkien made the right call here. But let me know your thoughts on the Children of the Valar in the comments below. From this tale, we see that sometimes subtlety can be better, and we should take our time to improve concepts just as Tolkien did here. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit that like button and share this with a friend. Thanks again, and shout out to Tolkien Gateway for making this video much easier to make. Links in the description below, check them all out. If you'd like to support the channel, we have a partnership with Mythologie Candles through the links below. Use the code Men of the West for 10% off that first order, or check out CastleCon's Lord of the Rings replicas and use the code WEST at checkout. And please also take a look at our merch. Join our memberships and Patreon for access to our Discord and our monthly podcast. We just did an episode recently, so please take a look at that. And finally, check out Masters of Mythology, our second channel on myths and legends. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons and YouTube members, Joby Weasel, Ed Patterson, ComicNut64, Zoomi, Peter Sheppard. Thank you all so much for keeping the channel going. Don't forget to subscribe and join the Men of the West. And my friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.